still think you should quit.
What do you give me if I do?
Wow.
That's pretty much the only scene with actual tension. Okay, a love triangle between one girl and two brothers, a story about first love, first heartbreak, and the magic of that one perfect summer. So reads the IMDb blurb for The Summer I Turned Pretty, Amazon Prime's response to All the Boys I Loved Before, a movie-length story stretched into a 7-episode miniseries that adapts Jenny Han's trilogy. Awesome. Sign me up. Not everything has to be genre-bending genius. There's really nothing wrong with this reiteration of tropes we've seen before. A lot of the best rom-coms and romantic dramas follow the exact same story shape, and if it's well executed, who cares? The Summer I Turned Pretty has a nice, simple premise. Belly has had a glow-up over the school year. She's heading back to the family friend summer home with her brother Steven and recently divorced mom Laurel. Laurel's best friend Susanna will be there, it's her home, along with Susanna's 2 sons, Conrad and Jeremiah. Belly has a crush on Conrad, she always has. She's got a best friend named Taylor who comes to visit. Laurel meets an intriguing author named Cleveland, and slowly we come to know that Susanna is suffering from cancer but has decided to keep that secret from everyone but Laurel. What a great plot setup. No notes. We've got some true classics here, not just a love triangle, but a brother love triangle. I see you, Vampire Diaries. We've got Conrad and Jeremiah echoing a Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley duo. We've got 2 generations of drama as both moms have gone through breakups. We've got a jealous best friend. We've got rich people on summer break spending money. Awesome. This is a fastball right down the middle, an easy home run. We've pretty much seen it before. We have a young woman named Isabel, goes by a nickname, with divorced parents who is tomboyish, not like the other girls, has low self-esteem, but is also so beautiful and down-to-earth that without fail and without trying, every single man she meets outside her family is entirely infatuated with her. You see, couldn't they have at least changed the name? But it's strange. The show doesn't really deliver on the story tropes that it promises. Yes, there's a love triangle, but the drama is played down. There's minimal tension considering they're all under the same roof. When we take a step back and look at the shape of the story, the seasons should be, rise and fall, there's actually not really a ton of structure to the story. Things just sort of happen, which sadly brings me to the books. Oh, the books. Look, normally I would always suggest reading the source material. I would always rather promote literature and suggest that folks go out there and read the books, even if they are very clearly beach read, light reads, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you enjoyed the show and you want more of the vibes, you want more of Cousins Beach and the love triangle, you want to hear more about the supporting characters like Steven or Taylor, I'm afraid you'll simply have to wait for season 2. The books are astonishingly bad. Won't say too much more. The prose is really something else, but the main problem is that there is no plot, there are no real characters, so there's no story, none. The show makes excellent additions, though, to the source material to provide structure that is otherwise entirely missing. And Jenny Han, who wrote the books, is a creator and writer on the show. Girl, where was this in your books? Why don't you write like this? But let's talk about that, what the show does well. Number 1, the main narrative structure. So the entire season is working towards what we know will be the big finale, the debutante ball. The ball is really a cheap shortcut to have dramatic tension because we know Belly needs an escort, we know everyone will be there. It's been done 100 times in teen stories because it works really well, it's easy, it's simple. We don't know exactly what's gonna happen, but we've got a general idea of what's coming. Most importantly, it's introduced to us in episode 1. So, throughout all the episodic drama, we do have an overarching concern, an overarching idea of an impending climax. Along the way, there are noteworthy events that mark Belly's stages in the plot throughout the summer. We've got the bonfire party where she meets Cameron, we have the 4th of July party where she ruins things with Cameron while escalating things with Conrad. That's also when we discover Jeremiah is apparently harboring feelings for her, which really, besides the show description, came out of nowhere, but whatever. Then the volleyball tournament, where things with Jeremiah don't look so good, and Conrad steps back into the light, and then of course the debutante ball, where everything comes to a head for all the various subplots, and despite Jeremiah's seeming triumph, Belly ends up kissing Conrad the next morning or later that night, it's not really clear. And the peak of the action at the Deb Ball revolves around Jeremiah discovering his mom's secret and that Conrad knew the whole time, letting their confrontation be about something more significant than the foreground plot of the show, than Belly. And then we immediately cut to Belly saying how stupid she feels for thinking selfishly about shallow crap while this much heavier suffering was there along in the background. And that clues us in on the cleverness of the season, but also the weakness of the season. All of Belly's drama feels like it's the most important thing in the show world. And that's what Susanna's character really wanted. She wanted life to feel fun and light for one last summer. That really compelling tension, though, is sort of thrust upon us. It's a bit of a trick, like, you thought this show was about a love triangle, wrong, it's actually about the fulcrum of the family, Susanna, leaving all of them. That's the real story. And there's a very heavy distinction in this show between plot and story, which I'll continue to talk about. By plot here, I mean what literally happens. The actual comings and goings of characters and life events. Story, though, it's harder to convey. For example, in Cinderella, the plot is about a poor girl who goes to a ball, meets a prince, but the story is really about believing in dreams and the rewards in being a good, humble person. So, The Summer I Turned Pretty has a plot that revolves around Belly's love interests, but the finale impresses upon us that the story is really about enjoying life and loving those close to you. The bridge between plot and story is pretty tenuous. It's not really until the finale that it's apparent, but the main narrative structure of the plot is very good. It's a big improvement from the books. And the main connection between the plot and the story is the next thing the show does well, Conrad. Sadly enough, Conrad is far more interesting than Belly, but let's stay positive for a minute. They do Conrad well, and again, it's an addition to the books that he knows his mom is sick. This is a very smart move. In the books, Conrad is just, to use the author's words, dark, 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 with no explanation. It's just how he is, and that's fine, I guess, but in the show, we're led to believe that he used to be really charming and outgoing, into football, close with his dad, but that this summer, he's inexplicably not acting himself. There are incongruencies here and there with that backstory, but it works well enough, and we, the audience, know that it's not inexplicable. He has this burden of knowing his mom's secret while everyone else trots along doing stuff that just doesn't matter to him anymore. And it's really compelling. It's sad to watch. I wish they had played it up even more so that we can see he loves Belly, but he can't be with her because he's struggling so much and because he has to focus on his mom. The show gives him a mentor, not in the books, an older friend in Cleveland, who teaches Conrad about navigating feelings and anxiety as Conrad teaches him about sailing, which is a nice bit of symmetry. I loved their dynamic, and it was a great way to show the audience what Conrad is going through. We see him act somewhat confusing, but then we get a scene with Cleveland that clues us in, so we can be sympathetic and know things that Belly doesn't know. To all of the characters, he's acting really strange, but to us, all of his external behavior, his drinking, his mood swings, his distance, they all line up with this core internal arc for him. The resolution of which is kind of subtle. They mostly just hint at letting him realize that he's not responsible for his mom's health and that he can still be a kid and be happy and seek out happiness for himself. But by this point, Belly has switched to Jeremiah, and he accepts this. And for a teen love triangle show, it's weirdly undramatic. But it makes Conrad likable and interesting. He's doing the nice, right thing by letting her go. At the end of episode 6, Jeremiah congratulates Conrad about the volleyball win, and Conrad responds saying, "It's not about winning for me, it's about doing things the right way." Which, for a volleyball tournament, doesn't make a ton of sense in context, and it's not very subtle, but it works. The contrast is that Jeremiah does lie and manipulate circumstances to get Belly alone. He's not manipulative or wrongful or bad, but he does sort of cheat in a way. He takes his mom's phone to find things out, whereas Conrad is meant to be much more serious, more mature. He wouldn't have pulled the little stunts that Jeremiah does. So there's our explanation for a lack of triangle drama, and I kinda like it. It just should have been a little more clear that Conrad does change his life outlook by the end. Cleveland helps him lessen his responsibility, but that doesn't change anything plot-wise, and the resolution for Conrad's plot doesn't come until Jeremiah and then everyone else finds out about Susanna. He and Belly can then kiss and be together, but A, that's something that happens to Conrad. He doesn't take any steps himself to communicate with Susanna or Belly, and B, Conrad and Belly have, at that point, already had several moments where, despite Belly seemingly shutting him down, it's clear she still wants him. So it's not quite a tidy package for Conrad, but his narrative is definitely the strongest of anyone's, and without it, there'd be no connection between the deeper meaning of this story and the plot that we watched for 7 hours. Number 3, Taylor. In the books, Taylor is pretty awful. At least Belly thinks of her that way. We're in Belly's head the whole time, and most comments about Taylor are very disparaging and insulting, and some of that carries over into the show, but in a way that feels more organic and much more balanced. Taylor definitely does steamroll some of Belly's personality, but we see where it's coming from a bit more. She's jealous, she really values Belly and wants her to be happy. And after their fight, she does transform into much more of a supporting character who supports Belly at every turn and stands up for her when need be. Now, the other strong points of the show have less to do with storytelling and more to do with aesthetic and really fun music, vibe, tempo, certainly a very strong cast. It's fun, scene by scene, it's a really fun show, and honestly, one of my favorite things about it is how clearly you can tell the show was written by women. There are some male writers on the show, but it's mostly women, and the payoff is that, yes, this is a really shallow wish fulfillment show written for girls, but if it were a really shallow wish fulfillment show written for girls written by men, we wouldn't have these really mature boys being so kind to their mom, getting all hyped up for a deb ball and doing a coordinated dance for their dates. We wouldn't have them talking about girls with actual respect and care and thinking that Laurel is really cool. It's a bit unrealistic, sure, but these shows always are, and it's pretty nice just to relax and let this sort of wholesome plot unfold in a way that feels good from a girl perspective. And some of the writing is actually pretty good. For instance, Belly describes how her crush on Conrad was always safe to her because she knew it wouldn't happen, but kissing Jeremiah was real, and that's scary, and that's an interesting tension that we live some of our lives in our heads, and we do that because it can be safer for us. Nicole, the girl Conrad strings along all summer, isn't cast as the villain, and when she breaks up with him, Conrad really apologizes. He even acknowledges that he's going through stuff isn't an excuse for mistreating her. In the series finale, Belly thinks Susanna has, as a surprise, bought the dress Belly really wanted, but it was actually Laurel, and they have a really lovely mother-daughter moment. And I'm not saying men can't write like this, but time and time again, they don't. So we did once again, though, have a protagonist who is super pure, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't get with people, which is fine, it's fine. But we can't avoid it any longer, we have to talk about Belly, which brings us to... Ugh, Belly. God, there is not one shred of characterization for our protagonist. When she shows up, she's kinda naive, she's crushing on Conrad, but she's got an eye open to other things, and that is how she stays the entire season. Moments like her breakup with Cameron and her fight with Taylor, in fact, her dating Cameron and the visit from Taylor, they don't lead to any change or development for her. She just keeps on plugging along, occasionally telling us that she is 100% definitely over Conrad, and then she'll make special eye contact with him or something, and she'll say something like, but it's always been Conrad. And that could have been a fun sort of self-aware reflection of how teenagers navigate their love lives. I'm totally over him, JK, I'm not. But each time she tells us, it's always very final, very dramatic. There's calm, emotional music playing. At one point, she says that her crush has just faded away and disappeared altogether. And I kept thinking, okay, so Conrad's gonna have to win her back, but no, it really just comes and goes depending on what the plot needs. In the finale, Jeremiah is absent for Belly's big dance, and Conrad has to step in. So as they dance, Laurel says to Susanna, to Belly, Conrad is the sun, and when the sun comes out, the stars disappear. Which is a weird thing to say, and also isn't true. The sun has already come out a few times. Conrad has given Belly the necklace, he's apologized, he's made it clear that he cares for her, and at that moment, Belly tells him, you're too late. So why is it different now that he's stepping in to dance? What has changed for her? Nothing. It makes so little sense. We also do not have any idea why Jeremiah and Conrad love her so much. Cameron is fine. They've just met, and it's not serious, but Jeremiah and Conrad have known her their entire lives, so falling in love is a hugely intimate thing for them. And why? 'Cause she's pretty? She doesn't have anything in common with either one except for their summer house, and that is what keeps getting shoved in our faces. Why should Belly be with Conrad? Because it's Belly and Conrad. Here's a flashback. Here's an old picture. Ah, infinity. But those aren't reasons. Why should Belly be with Jeremiah? When they make out in his car, she says she was always nervous to go this far with a boy, but it was okay because it was Jeremiah. I mean, in the scene literally right before that, it's when she's telling Taylor that Jeremiah is so real, it scares her, but whatever. What do you mean because it's Jeremiah? What about him? For both of these boys, the love connection is just how long they've known each other.
Same old Belly.
I mean, that sounds nice, but what? What are you talking about? To the extent that backstory is relevant to the plot, it needs to be seamlessly incorporated. Instead, the mere concept of backstory serves as explanation for why this love triangle exists. I don't know what you mean by same old Belly. It's just a reminder that they knew each other before we met them. And can we please have anything else? We don't get a single moment where either pair connect over something personal, or even show that they have anything uniquely in common. And we couldn't. We couldn't because Belly doesn't have character. She has external personality, but peel back the layer of her quirks and baggy t-shirts and sugary cereal and overall demeanor and her love for summer, and we don't have anything. So we can't really root for either couple in the way we might root for Jim and Pam or Chuck and Blair. The show just angles towards making both Jeremiah and Conrad really attractive, clearly hoping that its preteen audience will just fan over both these characters and that will be enough to drive viewership, but it's disappointing as a story. We can't get involved. I preferred Conrad because he's a fleshed out dynamic character, but Belly seemed happy with Jeremiah. Then a scene later, she's happy with Conrad, who's her only love. Then it's back to Jeremiah, who was the real love all along. And I don't really care, because I'm not invested in Belly whatsoever. That's bad, and it gets worse. It can be intentional to have an everyman sort of protagonist, such that we can all watch the show and have different understandings of a character. We can project ourselves onto the character, and given that Belly is 16 and an irrational person, that would actually be fine. We as the audience could watch her get with Jeremiah, and I might think, okay, she's doing that because she just needs validation or something. Someone else could think, oh, she's using him, being selfish, or no, she actually loved Jeremiah the whole time. But we can't do that here. They don't let us, because the show opts to do the worst thing it possibly could have, bringing us to number 2. So the show opens with an expository scene between Belly and Taylor, talking about summer, about Conrad, about Belly's new look. It's a very unsubtle scene that's designed to set up the whole premise, and that's fine, that's good. It covers a lot of groundwork, and we even get the whole history of Belly going to this beach house every summer. But then, immediately afterwards, Belly, as the narrator, tells us all the things we have just been shown. Oh my god. It only gets worse from there. Time and time again, we'll have a scene like Belly and Conrad making a bed together, and Lola Tung as Belly does a great performance. We can see she's daydreaming while they're making the bed. We can see she's imagining really being with him. And then the narrator voice just interrupts us as audience watching this and says, "Is this what it would be like?" You don't need to do that. We're watching. We're with you. Stop. But because they open this door, we are now very intimately connected with our protagonist. We are in her head. We can't really disagree amongst ourselves as audience about what she's thinking. We know what she's thinking. Sometimes. The use of narration is so sporadic that there are moments where Belly is being really confusing. Did you want to do this Deb thing or not? She acts both ways. But by breaking this fourth wall, we watch the show knowing that to the extent there is a deeper level to Belly's consciousness, we are in the know. Which is a disaster, because Belly isn't very interesting at all, and now we're precluded from projecting interest onto her. Her narration does not add to her character. We don't get any moments where she acts one way, then clues us in on how she's feeling in a different way that creates tension. We don't find out anything we didn't already know. We are simply precluded from imagining depth in our protagonist because we've already seen behind the curtain and there is none. Her voiceovers are often random. As she gets ready for the deb ball, she has this narration saying, "Girls aren't supposed to know when we're pretty, but isn't that stupid because we're all beautiful in our own way?" Sure, fine, that's nice. It's a nice theme for the show, or it would have been if it didn't just come out of absolutely nowhere. Belly, you've known you were pretty all summer, and that's great. So where is this coming from? All the girls in this show are absurdly beautiful. There has not been one single moment where anyone questioned that about anyone else. As a storytelling mechanism, this narration is just a shortcut to confer very random meaning over otherwise meaningless scenes. And speaking of meaningless scenes, let's turn to problem number 3. While the show is presented as if it is entirely about Belly, like the book is, there are actually 2 other plot threads. One follows Laurel and Susanna's friendship, along with each of their marital issues, and of course Susanna's illness. Laurel actually gets a pretty good journey this season. She starts as a responsible mom, and then because Susanna is so focused on enjoying life, smelling the roses, having fun, she encourages Laurel to let her hair down, and Laurel gets a fun romance with Cleveland before the climax of everyone discovering Susanna's secret, such that Laurel has to go back to being a responsible mom as a slightly changed woman. There's also a weird sort of surge of drama for her in the finale, where it's almost hinted that her ex-husband and Cleveland might form another love triangle, and very interestingly, Laurel at one point tells Belly that the man she married, she loved like a campfire. It was safe and comfortable, but that there was one person in her life who felt like fireworks, but they never could have been together because they would have destroyed each other. It's brushed over, and I really forgot about it until the finale, when her ex-husband says, "Sometimes I think the only person you ever truly loved was Susanna." Now, this isn't in the books at all, but we are kind of getting a bit of a more than friends connection between Laurel and Susanna. I don't know, they could definitely go that direction. They're certainly very important to each other, and it's a very moving friendship either way. Now, this subplot really works. While Susanna doesn't really change throughout the season, she's not exactly dynamic, her struggle is directly related to the main plot, thanks to the addition of Conrad knowing the secret. And as discussed, the show is really about her summer. This is her show, in a way. Laurel experiencing a fun summer romance is also somewhat of a parallel to her daughter doing the same thing, and that's a nice thematic connection, and we can see that the thrill of new summer love isn't limited to youth. That's nice, you know, go Laurel. Sadly, the other subplot is pretty needless filler, and it's a bummer because I really like Steven. He's much better than he is in the books, but his journey is just awful. The setup is interesting. He has to work to save up for college, he's contrasted with Jeremiah saying he doesn't have a trust fund, and at some point he has to decide whether to put up with the racist abuse of the wealthy club men so that he can earn more money, or if he's gonna quit and say something because he's so uncomfortable. That's great tension, but it's just dropped. It goes nowhere. He falls for Sheila, who is vaguely connected to Belly through the deb ball, and decides to spend all of his money on a tux for Sheila and her deb ball, and then he loses all that money in a poker game. Now, person who plays in a high-rolling poker game and loses more money than they can afford is something we've seen 100 times, but what I've never seen is someone as cruel as Sheila in response. Steven goes to her house to apologize that he can't get the tux. He feels awful, he's basically crying, and she's pissed. She's enraged that he lost this money. She says, "Did you even consider how it would make me feel?" What on earth? It is such a heartless response to her boyfriend, and again, it just goes away. The only contemplative moment for Steven is at the deb ball. It's very fleeting when he finally tells Sheila he feels like he doesn't really belong in her world, and she basically says, "No, that's okay," and then they're all good. That's it. This entire subplot is entirely irrelevant to the main plot. Take the whole thing out, delete Steven, and nothing about the story changes, which makes sense since Steven really isn't in the first book. There is overlap, but it's only because the characters run into each other at main events. It's only that they cross paths, otherwise this is just another TV show stacked on top of the one we're watching already, and it's not really interesting when you look at it on its own. every point of potential drama. Steven getting with Taylor, or Sheila being best friends with Nicole. It just doesn't matter, and it always just kind of goes away. And the biggest frustration with all these subplots is really the waste of setting. Now, the narrator, Belly, tells us how important the beach house is. The house is magical, it's where dreams come true, it's where life is special and sunny and romantic. But nothing of interest happens in the house. The house should be the point of intersection for all our subplots. It should feel like its own character, but because there are so many added plot events, all the action happens elsewhere. They may as well have been staying in separate houses, which really defeats the whole premise of the show. And now we get to the final intrigue of the show, the thing that makes it stand out from all the other content in its category. The most interesting thing about it, irrelevant detail. This show is jam-packed full of details that do not matter. Jeremiah, throughout the whole season, finishes everyone's cereal milk. There's a blender that the kids are allowed to use and one they're not allowed to use, and they discuss this. Belly has a stuffed polar bear named Junior Mint. Cameron works on a whale watching boat. Cameron's into marine biology. And think about Cameron for a second. Why is Cameron here? What does he do? Belly's season-long plot is all about Conrad. So what does Cameron advance for her that Jeremiah doesn't? Nothing! Belly and Conrad are flirting in episode 1 before we even meet Cameron. Conrad and Jeremiah, maybe they're a bit jealous of Cameron, but they never say that or do anything about it. Jeremiah doesn't take weird, schemey action until Belly is about to kiss Conrad. Nothing to do with Cameron. Cameron has no narrative function. He doesn't move the plot along. And he has no dramatic function either. During their first date as a narrator, Belly tells us that she finally feels the way she always thought it would to date someone. She finally has her first real kiss. It's amazing. She won't even think about Conrad this summer. But no, that was just for a quick episode or two. And it just goes away. She doesn't even have a moment where she realizes, oh wow, I guess I can never really be into anyone else. No, and we can't imagine that. We can't imagine that she's dating this guy to force herself to get past Cameron and she doesn't really like him, anything like that, because the narrator tells us everything she's thinking. So why is Cameron here? Why do they set up a class dynamic between Laurel and Susanna? That goes nowhere. Why is Junior Mint here?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
There's no answer to these questions. Now, in the world of literature, the concept of irrelevant details is actually a pretty fascinating discourse. Some authors, like Tolstoy, use seemingly irrelevant detail to heighten meaning. Some, like Virginia Woolf, process detail through the eyes of a character so we feel life the way they feel life. Roland Barthes thought all details are used to portray not reality, but the concept of reality. Like they're a trick to take us somewhere that doesn't actually exist, and it's really up to you as a reader or a viewer to think about detail however you want. Does a layer of gratuitous detail create a sense of reality? Does it do anything for us? Sure, it's plenty realistic that one of the boys might like milk so much that he finishes other people's cereal. People are weird like that, but what does that do for the story? What does it tell us about Jeremiah? Well, nothing, really. It's just there. So, is The Summer I Turned Pretty by Amazon Prime a great experiment in the use of untelling detail? Are all these details, the flower crowns, the special muffins they eat, Cameron being vegetarian, Cameron at all, are they built up to denote reality, to create the effect of the real so that we're lulled into believing this magical summer really happened? Is this a Nathan Fielder-esque statement on fiction versus reality and the performativity of our own existence?
No, definitely not.
No, obviously no. It's not an intellectual, artsy masterpiece, and it doesn't ask any interesting questions about fiction, but it's kind of interesting that we spend so much time hearing about all these little things that don't matter to the story or the plot. They just are. It kind of feels real. These characters don't always act like characters who need to take us on a narrative journey. Sometimes they just act weird and talk about things that don't matter, and that's how life is. Belly normally has pancakes on her birthday, then this year, she's not hungry in the morning, then she eats them later at night. And this tells us nothing for the story. It's so weird and unnecessary that it's almost realistic. But sadly, we are in Belly's head, so unlike real life, we can't see someone just being a normal person doing weird things and have to imagine what's beneath the surface because sadly, we know that nothing really is, and all the extraneous details, they're just globbed on from the books. The only character whose details in this show actually matter is Conrad, his drinking, his having quit football, the sailing trophies in his room, his smoking. They all relate to his inner narrative, and again, that's only because the show adds that he's carrying a heavy secret. Otherwise, if you watch every episode with an eye for things that are just there for no reason and mean nothing, I'm sure most of the random things were just in the books, and for whatever reason they felt like it had to be included in the show. If all these things were added on top of an interesting plot that told a compelling story through dynamic characters, I'd be pretty impressed. And even without those elements, I will say that some of the scenes are pretty realistic. There's very awkward dialogue.
Try it. You try coming up with a motivational phrase with no cheese.
Thinking. Thinking.
Brought us some avocado and sprout sandwiches.
Thank you.
Well, you gotta use the good blender.
This random stuff is just sort of thrown in for no reason, and scene by scene, on its own, it kinda works. But then we'll have a group of 17-year-old boys do a coordinated dance in tuxedos, or a rich person volleyball tournament for charity, where every kid there is inexplicably sick at volleyball, so the realism effect is fleeting at best, and, more importantly, not part of a comprehensive story. The primary source of all the show's issues is, sadly, the books. With the exception of Steven and Sheila's kind of boring romance, all of the additions and changes are vastly for the better. And the show's sort of secret story, Susanna's illness and how it affects her family whether they know it or not, is a great story. But unnecessary loyalty to weak source material muddles this show, so that we have a heavy focus on a boring protagonist, while much more interesting potential, namely in Conrad and Laurel's arcs, are forced to take a back seat and feel almost entirely disconnected to what actually happens. So what we end up having as the audience is a pretty intriguing story, right? A pair of best friends, and they don't always see eye to eye, but they're bound by loyalty, love, and the burden of one of them being sick. This supposed one last summer where everything needs to be bright and beautiful and fun because it could be Susanna's last, all while somewhat juvenile dilemmas fly around back and forth, with the tension between those two worlds carried in the heart of the eldest son, who's turning into a shadow of his former self, while everyone around him wonders what's wrong and gets annoyed with him, and he has to hold it in together for his mom while watching the girl he loves, who he knows loves him back, get away because he's just too occupied. We've got that, and it's a great story. It goes well beyond how the show is packaged, but it's got very little to do with the actual plot and what we're served. And honestly, I've been being a little generous extrapolating all of that from what really is just little breadcrumbs throughout the episodes. So while yes, the main narrative is well structured in terms of action and events, it doesn't advance or portray any story whatsoever. Belly goes through nothing. She gets with 3 different boys, plus that gas station boy date. She fights with her mom, she fights with her best friend. There's a lot of emotional whiplash with Conrad. But she goes through nothing. There is no story to the main plot narrative. There is no story to the title of the show, The Summer I Turned Pretty, as a concept. It's got no bearing on anything. I guess except Belly is attractive now, but even that doesn't seem to matter. The show doesn't act like Jeremiah and Conrad used to think she was super ugly until this summer. In fact, they both say they've always thought about her in a sort of special way. And her serious inexperience with boys is highlighted in comparison to other girls, but also does not matter. It never matters. None of it matters. Someone at Amazon must have picked up this book because it's written by Jenny Han, realized that it's devoid of story but attached to a trendy author's name, and decided that, I guess, a simple movie with no meaning would be insufficient, so instead we needed 7 hours. But 7 hours without any story is pretty dull, so they changed just about everything. They added characters, created events, made up an actual plot for the season, and all that's in common with the book is just the vibe? I can't even say the character names are in common because they changed that too. Belly has a new last name, I guess to reflect that Laurel is Korean American in the show but not in the books. And these are additions. Jenny Han also was more than happy to add some diversity in new characters like Cleveland and the lesbian Deb girl character. We also have Jeremiah being bisexual and Nicole as black. And these are all great additions, but that even the cast of characters is a departure from the books just indicates how far removed the show is, once again, for the better. In fact, all of the iconic moments in the show, from the escort dance to the skinny dipping, the volleyball, the drinking games, the special dress, the paintings of the kids that Susanna does, they're all add-ons. So look, Is there a story here? Is there a story in The Summer I Turned Pretty? Yeah, if you do some labor and really focus on Conrad. Is this a good show? No. It's designed to be trendy. It's designed for TikTok and BuzzFeed quizzes, and that's fine. It's fine.
You have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
It's kind of harrowing to watch 7 hours of television and just not care what happens to the protagonist. It's harrowing because I fully intend on watching season 2 when it comes out. It's relaxing, and I gave her a lot of crap, but I like Belly. I like most of the characters, and some of those extra details are entertaining. Susanna is kind of a Karen. Jeremiah isn't bi just as a label. They really show him being bi. Laurel is an author who just doesn't write. Stephen is protective over Belly without being controlling. You'll notice though that all of these details don't come from the books. The style, the music choices, the outfits, they all come from this 2022 teen culture, and it's kind of interesting to see this as a cultural refresh. The cast seems really fun. I genuinely enjoyed watching, and there were a handful of really cute moments. But if this is the future, if this is what we can expect to be promoted and celebrated as a story over shows like The Wilds, we are screwed.
Well, you gotta use the good blender.
Once you get to